This is Apropos. Critics in New Delhi describe the project as an existential threat. China is building the world's largest dam on a river that runs through Tibet and India, prompting concerns about the effects the megastructure could have on downstream states. The project has prompted the Indian government to fast-track plans for its own dam to mitigate the effects. Monty Francis has the details.
This is currently the largest hydropower plant in the world in central China, but Beijing is building another that, when finished, would be 3 times as powerful as the current record holder. The construction site for the Moto hydropower station is located along the Yarlung-Tsangpo River in Tibet, which China annexed in 1951. India, worried that China will weaponize its control of the river, has planned to build a dam of its own in the Indian state of Arunachal Pradesh. But when workers from India's largest hydropower company moved survey equipment in at the construction site, nearby villagers vandalized the machinery and even demolished a nearby bridge.
If the dam is constructed, how will we earn our livelihoods? So we will not allow the dam to be constructed. If the dam is built, the soil will be washed away. We produce our crops on this soil.
The battle over who controls the flow of water from a glacier on the Tibetan plateau affects millions of people living downriver in India, China, and Bangladesh. India's fears appear to be founded. A report by an Australian-based think tank concluded that control over the rivers in the Tibetan plateau would effectively give China a chokehold on India's economy. But villagers who live near the site of the Indian dam say their own country's plans would effectively destroy their way of life.
If the government forcefully moves forward with this project, the existence of our community will vanish from the map because the people will be scattered. There is no plan to relocate the people of this valley.
As for China's massive project, Beijing denies there would be a negative impact for those downstream, saying it expects to start generating energy from the dam by the early to mid-2030s.
For more on what's at stake, we're joined by Rana Mitter, ST Lead Chair in US-Asia Relations at the Harvard Kennedy School. Rana, thanks so much for being with us this evening. As we heard in Monty's report, China saying there's nothing to worry about here, but both India and Bangladesh have voiced concerns about this project. Are those concerns warranted in your view? How will these countries be affected?
Sharon, yes, there are genuine reasons for concern. Although China has tried to make the case that there's really nothing to worry about here, in practice, many analysts and many politicians for decades have been wondering whether one of the major possible causes of a conflict in the Himalayan region might be actually what some people call a water war. In other words, access to big rivers like the ones we've been talking about here, not just in terms of the actual water flow, but the use of them for hydroelectric power. The fact is that India and China are geopolitical rivals. They have moved a little closer to each other in recent weeks and months, partly because they both have issues with the current US administration. But the basic bottom line here is that control of the river further up the source, which enables China to use the hydroelectric power, may well cut off India's ability to do that. And that suggests that there is a sort of zero-sum potential conflict, not necessarily military, but certainly political, coming up between the two.
And would that explain then what China's motive is here? Is it effectively weaponizing water, as some are claiming in India?
I don't think that's the primary purpose. I think the primary purpose actually is really quite simple. China needs huger and huger amounts of energy. To take one issue that's been hugely in the news recently, but people don't always associate with water, AI, artificial intelligence. It's well known that outside the United States, China is probably the leading global provider when it comes to AI. But to make AI work, you need massive data farms, which need massive amounts of electricity to go into them. And China is still a very energy-hungry country. As it becomes one of the world's major tech providers, it needs lots more energy. And huge mega dam projects like this, providing hydropower, are green. They don't provide fossil fuel pollution, and therefore they don't contribute to climate change in the same sort of way. So that's good. But also the huge demands they make mean that China's likely to prioritize essentially getting maximum power out of the dam and deprioritize good relations with the neighbor. So no, I don't think the primary purpose is to weaponize the river, but that may be the secondary effect of this immense hunger for power and electricity.
And locals as well concerned about India potentially constructing a mega dam of its own. But how exactly can it go about mitigating against what might happen here if it doesn't go ahead and build that dam?
I think that it's going to be very tough indeed, because India is also immensely energy hungry and also desperately needs to reduce the amount of fossil fuel emissions that are engendering climate change in India, as they are indeed in China. One of the possibilities, but again, geopolitically, it's very, very tricky, is to come to a better agreement with Pakistan, its neighbor with which actually since the 1960s, it's had an agreement over the waters on the Indus River. The problem with that is that, as is very well known, India and Pakistan have perhaps an even worse relationship in military terms than India and China. In fact, they nearly came to war. They came to a small but potentially very dangerous conflict earlier this year. Without that, I suppose it's really incumbent on India to decide if it wants to go big on nuclear power. That's the other non-fossil fuel-based pathway aside from hydro. But the problem with that is that you can't just whip up a nuclear power station overnight. It takes time. There are issues with earthquake zones. None of these, frankly, is a very easy solution to this real problem for India.
And is there a risk realistically that China might move to exploit these rivers so that it can have more control, so to speak, over the Indian economy? You've referred to the economy a little earlier.
I think there's a risk that China would think about using that possibility. As I say, I don't think it's their primary purpose. But if you think about the way in which overall China has really moved towards making much more use of its control over water, maritime issues in general, South China Sea, the Taiwan Straits. These days, China has tremendous capacity in naval power. Obviously, naval power isn't so usable on rivers, but the idea that you might use water as a means to essentially conduct very robust and sometimes, frankly, confrontational diplomacy, that's not outside the realm of possibility. Essentially, though, having said that, there is one factor in the last few weeks that may push in the other direction. China has seen that India, having become at least a partner, if not a full ally of the United States, is now really not happy with the Trump administration. It feels that the Trump administration has put heavy tariffs on India and that India essentially has not been given the kind of bargain it was expecting in terms of being a good security partner for the United States. In that context, it does look likely that the India-China dialogue, which was really quite frozen for a while, might begin to revive. I think recently the foreign ministers of both countries did, in fact, meet each other. If China wants to create that medium-term warmth with India, it will know that basically building an immense dam that might actually hem in India's energy choices would be a very confrontational gesture to make. So that kind of diplomacy might just push China in a different direction.
Yeah, because how might that relationship be affected long term by such a massive project?
If this project goes ahead and if China gets that control, don't forget, not just on the waters into India, but also into Bangladesh and other parts potentially of the region beyond, then it will give China a tremendous amount of power, but it also creates a vulnerability because every time that something is done that goes against the interests of India or Bangladesh, it will create a diplomatic crisis. And there's a question about how many diplomatic crises China actually wants to navigate at any one time. Simply saying nothing to see here is probably not going to be enough. In the longer term, India and China have two of the biggest economies in Asia, let alone the world, and it seems unlikely that either one is simply going to cut the other one off. So there are negotiations here that are potentially doable around a combination of security, energy, environment, and trade. But they'll involve both sides having to have much deeper, much franker, much more complex conversations than either has had really since the 1960s, when a massive war between India and China in 1962 really broke off relations between the two for a long time in the modern sense. So it demands some pretty, subtle diplomacy, which neither side yet has shown a very good sign of being able to do. But this may be the moment at which that has to change.
And Rana, how finally then would you rate the possibility of all of this prompting some kind of wider regional conflict?
Sharon, I don't think regional conflicts in the end are the most likely outcome because in the end, the economic growth that all of these countries, India, China, Pakistan, Bangladesh, desperately want is in some sense dependent on there not being huge conflicts in the region. But the fact is that China is the most powerful actor in the region, and therefore it has the responsibility to make sure that its actions are negotiated diplomatically and in business terms, and not simply imposed on the region. The ability to do that would show that China actually has diplomatic subtlety. Right now, that's a challenge that lots of its neighbors really are throwing at it, and it's not clear yet whether it's able to respond in a way that doesn't just satisfy the domestic Chinese audience, but also the regional Asian audience, which China says that it wants to do so much to try and woo and bring onto its side.
Rana, thank you so much for that very enlightening analysis. We do appreciate your time on the programme. That's Rana Mitter, ST Lead Chair in US Asia Relations at the Harvard Kennedy School. Well, that's it from us.